and welcome back to I Completed 80s Music with me, the 80s Mixtaper. Hope you're all having a lovely week. Spring has finally arrived in full effect and we've got a decent spell of warm weather. Normally, I do the research for the pod down the library, but for the first time this year, I was able to sit out in the garden, laptop on the table, and enjoy the sights and smells of the garden. Lovely stuff. For those new to the pod, back in 2016, I decided in a minor midlife crisis to try and listen to every single charting entry from the 31st of December 1979 to the 31st of December 1989, just to try and learn more about a decade I was a child in but knew little about. A dose of COVID and a lot of Susie and the Banshees, Heaven 17 and Sunita later, and I completed the mission by 2021. And then, because I enjoyed it so much, I started again. But then in 2024, I had the better idea of sharing this journey with you, the listener, and the podcast was born. Each week, we inch the calendar forward by another week or two and pick out the biggest, brightest and most bonkers songs the decade has to offer. We cover the starts, the ends, the makeups, the breakups, the production, the fun facts, and a whole lot more, as well as tell the story of the most colourful decade in pop music as it progresses one song at a time. Unfortunately, due to copyright laws, we cannot play the songs on the pod, but if you go to the episode description, you will discover hyperlinks to this week's playlist for both Spotify and Apple Music, plus a full track listing so you too can play along at home. So most people easily switch between the two when out on a walk or something. Each playlist is 13 songs long, like an album of yesteryear, and one week we'll cover the first 7 songs, and then the next week we'll cover the later 6. So that brings us to today. We've arrived now at mid-April 1982, and this week we dive into the first half of Playlist 40. We have Paul McCartney and Stevie Wonder partnering up for a duet. We meet Hot Chocolate, Yazoo and the Fixx. Patrice Rushen has her Men in Black moment. We learn what Junior's mother used to say, and we end with the entrance of Talk Talk to the party. So, without further ado, let's get back to the music. We start today with two kings of their own pop domain. Firstly, we meet again a certain Sir Paul McCartney, a man we haven't visited since way back in episode 3.5. Last time we caught up with Paul McCartney, it was late 1979. He was layering synthesizers for Wonderful Christmas Time, a track that became a holiday fixture despite its then polarizing experimental production. Meanwhile, the other person in this equation we've met several times already, Stevie Wonder, who was coming off his mid-70s classic period. When we saw him in early 1982, he was dominating the charts with That Girl, a smooth, harmonica-laced hit that served as a lead-in to his career-spanning compilation, Original Musicarium 1. But now, it's April 1982. McCartney is at a crossroads. The death of John Lennon in December 1980 has ended any possibility of a Beatles reunion and left Paul in deep reflection. Having disbanded Wings, he is once again a solo artist, working with his old mentor George Martin on an album that would become Tug of War. McCartney had written a simple song with a grand metaphor, racial harmony represented by the black and white keys of a piano. The inspiration didn't come from a deep sociological text, but from a comment he heard the comedian Spike Milligan say, "Black notes, white notes, and you need to play the two to make harmony, folks." The figure of speech is actually much older. It was popularised by James Agray in the 1920s, inspiring the title of the Pan-African journal The Keys, but was actually in use from at least the 1840s. What follows is a track that would spend 7 weeks at number 1 on the Billboard Hot 100, becoming Paul's biggest post-Beatles hit and a staple of 1980s pop culture. This is Ebony and Ivory, track 1, Playlist 40. To grasp Ebony and Ivory, you have to look at the sessions at Air Studios in Montserrat. McCartney and Wonder recorded the core of the track between February the 27th and March the 2nd, 1981, though the track was written solely by McCartney. While the original story about clashes of scheduling is a well-known bit of studio lore, the two did manage to find common ground during that window. McCartney said in an interview, "I wanted a black fella and me as the white fella. I thought that was the way it ought to be done. It seemed obvious. I thought if I could have anyone, it would be Stevie Wonder. So I got a demo to him and said, I'd love you to be the other singer on it. And Stevie sent a message back saying, sure, he liked it and he might do it. So I said, we're going to Montserrat and it would be great if we could team up there. We got to Montserrat and my manager came in a bit pasty-faced and said, I don't think Stevie's coming. Luckily, he was still on the phone, so I leapt to the phone. Stevie, you've got to come down. Stevie said, well, I've got some stuff up here to do. But he's a lovely guy, so I said, come on, you've got to come down. You haven't had a holiday, and it's fantastic here. Swimming, clear skies, it's gorgeous. So he came, and we made the track, and that was great. Technically, the song is a snapshot of early 80s production. It features the Linn LM1 drum machine, one of the first to use digital samples of real drums, giving that distinct metronomic pulse. George Martin's production kept it clean and clinical, which was exactly what radio wanted in 1982. However, the song's Ivory and Ebony legacy is famously divided. While it reached number one in both the UK and US, it has since become a frequent target for critics. In 2007, BBC Six Music listeners voted it the worst duet in history, and Blender magazine ranked it as the 10th worst song of all time. The primary criticism is its saccharine or simplistic approach to a complex issue. It was also seen as the end of McCartney's artistic credibility. But the song took on a much more serious weight in South Africa. Contrary to some myths, it wasn't banned immediately upon release in 1982. The ban came later, in 85, after Stevie Wonder accepted his Academy Award for I Just Called to Say I Love You and dedicated it to Nelson Mandela, who was then imprisoned. In retaliation, the South African Broadcasting Corporation banned Wanda's entire catalogue, and Ebony and Ivory became the only McCartney track to receive such a ban due to its association with Wanda and its message of racial unity. The music video, directed by Keith, famously features the pair side by side playing a grand piano and then sitting on the keys of a giant version. However, due to their conflicting schedules, they filmed their parts separately and were edited together to appear as if they were in the same room. It remains a fascinating moment in pop history, a meeting of two legends trying to solve the world's problems with 88 keys. For track 2, we're talking about a band that at the time felt like a permanent fixture of the British landscape. A group so consistent they practically became a weather pattern. Between 1970 and 1984, Hot Chocolate was the only group to have at least one hit in the UK charts every single year, a feat shared only by Elvis Presley and Diana Ross. We're looking at a track from the later part of that run, the 1982 single, Girl Crazy. Press play now. Hot Chocolate's story began in 1968 in Brixton, London, founded by Errol Brown and Tony Wilson. They weren't always the smooth pop soul machine we remember. They originally formed as a group of friends who wanted to reggae-fy popular songs. Their big break came with a cover of John Lennon's Give Peace a Chance. Errol Brown had actually rewritten some of the lyrics, but he was told he couldn't release it without Lennon's permission. A demo was sent to the Beatles' Apple Records. To the band's shock, Lennon loved the version and suggested they release it on the Beatles' own Apple label immediately. While the band didn't have a name yet, a secretary at the Apple office dubbed them the Hot Chocolate Band. Though the single gained airplay, it failed to chart in the UK or the US. When Apple began to dissolve as the Beatles split, the band was picked up by legendary producer Mickey Most for his RAK label. Most shortened the name to simply Hot Chocolate and paired them with his meticulous production style. For the first half of the 70s, Brown and Wilson were a songwriting powerhouse, penning hits for themselves like Emma in 1974, and for others including Think About Your Children for Mary Hopkin. By the mid-1970s, they were global stars. You Sexy Thing arrived in 1975, eventually becoming the only song to hit the British top 10 in the 70s, 80s and 90s. Tony Wilson left for a solo career in late 1975, leaving Brown as the primary songwriter. They finally secured their only UK number one in 1977 with So You Win Again, notably written by Russ Ballard. By 1982, the year Girl Crazy was released, Hot Chocolate were pop royalty. They had even been invited to a pre-wedding reception for Prince Charles and Lady Diana at Buckingham Palace in July 1981. Girl Crazy entered the UK singles chart on the 17th of April 1982. It peaked at number 7 in May and remained on the chart for a total of 11 weeks. The track, written by Errol Brown and produced by Mickey Most, is a quintessential piece of early 80s UK soul. Slick, rhythmic, and anchored by Brown's distinctive smooth delivery. The music video for the song remains a curious piece of the band's history. It features the band members in jogging gear, jogging through a council estate and then doing aerobics. Errol Brown later expressed his distaste for the concept in interviews, blaming some idiot director for a visual that didn't really sit good with his sophisticated image. Brown was famously meticulous about his appearance. He had shaved his head in his late teens due to his early hair loss, becoming one of the few bold icons in 1970s pop alongside Isaac Hayes. By the time the sun set on Girl Crazy in the summer of '82, Hot Chocolate weren't looking back. They had just proven that their brand of soul could survive the transition from the disco era into the high-gloss electronic pulse of the new decade. They remained a chart powerhouse, with Errol Brown's songwriting continuing to define the sound of British pop. This wasn't the end of their story, it was just another hit in a career that seemed like it might never stop. For track 3, a new group that begins with a departure. We have met Vince Clarke before. In our early Depeche Mode episodes, he was the primary architect of their bubblegum synth debut Speak and Spell. But by late 1981, Clarke was done. He officially left Depeche Mode in December 1981. He was tired of the touring, the lack of creative control, and the pop circus. Crucially, he had a song that his former bandmates simply didn't want. Clarke had written a ballad called Only You while still a member of Depeche Mode. He offered it to the band as a parting gift or final contribution, but they declined, choosing instead to record Martin Gore's See You as their first post-Clarke single. Fearing that Mute Records head Daniel Miller might drop him if he didn't produce a hit, Clarke sought a vocalist to record the demo. He turned to the classifieds of Melody Maker, where he found an advert placed by a local singer from Basildon called Genevieve Alison Jane Moyer. Moyer, known as Alf, was looking for a rootsy blues band following the breakup of her previous group, the Screaming Abdabs. Her deep, soulful contralto was far removed from the electronic world, but it provided the exact human element Clarke's minimalist synthesizers needed. This is our track 3. Press play now. Only You was recorded at Blackwing Studios in South East London, the same facility where Clarke had recorded Speak and Spell. The production team consisted of Clarke, Daniel Miller and Eric Radcliffe. The track's distinctive sound was built on a very limited palette. Clarke just used 3 main synthesizers for the recordings: a Sequential Circuits Pro 1, a Roland Juno 60 and an ARP 2600. The famous arpeggiated melody was programmed using a Roland MC4 microcomposer, creating a stark, precise backdrop for Moyer's emotional delivery. The lyrics, often interpreted as a straightforward love song, may have been influenced by events at the time. The NME thought it possible that it could be about leaving Depeche Mode, which lent the words a sense of melancholic longing. Despite its eventual status as a classic, Daniel Miller was initially hesitant. He wasn't convinced by the demo until a chance encounter with Scandinavian publishing associates who, upon hearing the track, reacted with immediate enthusiasm. This outside validation convinced Miller to release it as a single. Only You was released on the 15th of March 1982, and it was an instant success, climbing to number 2 on the UK singles chart and staying there for 3 weeks. It was kept from the top spot only by Nicole's Eurovision winner, A Little Piece, a song we'll be hearing in the next playlist. The success launched the duo, known as Yaz in North America to avoid legal conflict with the Yazoo Blues label, into the stratosphere. It proved Clarke could thrive outside the band he founded and established Alison Moyet as one of the most powerful vocalists of her generation. We're going to leave Yazoo there for now, enjoying the glow of their first hit. We'll be catching up with them soon again when they trade this fragile balladry for the high-energy dance floor of Don't Go on their debut album, Upstairs at Eric's. Next up, the early 1980s was a period of profound atmospheric anxiety. We were living in the shadow of the Cold War, a time when the existential threat of nuclear annihilation wasn't just a plot point. It was a low-frequency hum vibrating in the floorboards. It was the era of the new wave bands who made that dread sound clinical, jagged, and somehow incredibly catchy. Enter the Fixx. They weren't quite the neon-drenched romantics of Duran Duran, and they weren't quite the gloomy architects of The Cure. They occupied a space that was tighter, more anxious, and deeply obsessed with the architecture of the guitar line. In 1982, they released a song that served as a sonar ping for the era's collective unease. A song about lines in the sand where choices become permanent. This is Stand or Fall, track 4, playlist 40. The Fixx began life in London in 1979 as The Fixx with one X, founded by college friends Cy Curnin on vocals and Adam Woods on drums. They eventually expanded to include keyboardist Rupert Greenall, guitarist Jamie West Oram and bassist Alfie Aegis. They changed the spelling of their name to The Fixx with 2 X's at the behest of their label MCA Records, who were reportedly nervous about the drug connotations of the phrase getting a fix. Curnin was a frontman who didn't just sing, he enunciated with a theatrical, almost clipped urgency. But the secret weapon was Jamie West Oram. In an era of synthesizers, West Oram treated the guitar like a precision tool, creating clean chorus textures that felt more like glass than wood. Stand or Fall was a key single from their debut album, Shuttered Room, produced by Rupert Hine. Hine was the perfect foil for them. He specialised in a sound that was modern in a way that felt slightly cold and very expansive. The song itself was born out of Curnin's reaction to the political climate of the UK and the US in the early Reagan and Thatcher years. Speaking to Songfacts, Curnin reflected on the song's longevity, noting that it was written about the sense of impotence felt when the world leaders were designing a whole defence system that involved European lives without asking us. The lyrics, Stand or Fall, state your peace tonight, stand or fall, it's stated tonight, are a crossroads for survival in the face of a nuclear future. Curnin's primary cited inspiration was the general anti-war sentiment and the them or thus mentality of the era. The song addresses the realisation that when the big decisions are made by people in rooms you'll never enter, you are left with the simple choice. You either stand your ground or you crumble. The track was a slow burn. In the UK, it peaked at number 54. However, in the United States, it became the wedge that opened the door for them, reaching number 7 on the Billboard Top Rock Tracks chart and peaking at number 76 on the Hot 100. This was largely thanks to MTV, the music video featuring a white horse that repeatedly collapses, a scene that led to the video being banned in Britain due to animal welfare concerns, and it was on heavy rotation. Curnin noted the horse was a symbolic element meant to draw attention to the band's original delivery rather than a simple fashion video. The Fixx would go on to have bigger hits like One Thing Leads to Another, which hit number 4 in the US. But Stand or Fall remains their thesis statement. It's the sound of 5 guys from London looking at the horizon and seeing something they didn't quite trust. 40 years later, the them or us mentality it warned against hasn't exactly gone out of style. For track 5, in 1980 we left Patrice Rushen basking in the disco haze of Haven't You Heard, all the way back in episode 7. A song that proved this diminutive jazz prodigy with the baby fingers nickname could command a dance floor as easily as a Steinway piano. But the music industry has a notoriously short memory for artists who don't fit into neat, profitable boxes. By 1982, despite her technical brilliance and previous chart success, the executives at Elektra Records were ready to write her off. When she delivered her 7th studio album, the aptly titled Straight from the Heart, the A&R department was cold. They explicitly told her they didn't hear a single hit on the entire record. They looked at the track list and saw a flop in the making, not the cultural milestone it would become. They were spectacularly wrong. Patrice, alongside her longtime co-producer Charles Mims Jr. and the virtuoso bassist Reddy Freddie Washington, knew they had something undeniably special in the opening track. When the label refused to put up any significant money for its promotion, Rushen and Mims didn't just walk away. They took a massive, career-defining gamble on themselves. They pooled their own limited financial resources to hire independent promoters to push the track directly to radio programmers across the country. This is the next song, Forget Me Nots. This is track 5, playlist 40. You just heard it, that sliding, snapping, slap bass gravity that still feels like a physical pull. That is the unmistakable sound of Reddy Freddie Washington. Freddie didn't just play on the track, he co-wrote it with Rushen and lyricist Terry McFadden. The song actually began as a groove that emerged during an informal jam session at Rushen's family home, where Washington was actually living in the guest room at the time. Washington later admitted that for the song's breakdown bridge, he pulled directly from the sophisticated playbook of fusion legend Paul Jackson. He used muted finger pluck notes to create a space that allowed the entire groove to breathe while maintaining a distinctive half-time feel that anchored the entire composition. The lyrics used the symbolic forget-me-not flower to represent a deeply felt plea for enduring love despite the pain of separation. But in 1982, the irony was that the label executives almost let the song be forgotten before the public ever heard it. Once the independent promotion took hold and DJs started spinning the track, the record took off like wildfire, according to Rushen herself. It reached number 4 on the Billboard R&B chart and peaked at number 23 on the Hot 100 on July the 3rd, 1982. The success was so undeniable that the president of Elektra, Joe Smith, eventually realised his mistake. In a subsequent meeting, he apologised to Rushen and personally wrote her a cheque to reimburse every cent she had spent promoting her own hit. The song earned Rushen a well-deserved Grammy nomination for Best Female R&B Vocal Performance at the 25th Annual Grammy Awards in 1983. While she didn't win, losing to Jennifer Holliday's powerhouse And I'm Telling You I'm Not Going, the track's legacy was just beginning. It would go on to become a permanent staple of 80s disco and boogie soul, but its biggest mainstream transformation was still years away. The real neuralizer moment, if you will, for this song arrived 15 years later. In 1997, Will Smith needed a theme for a sci-fi blockbuster about secret agents in black suits who erase people's memories. He reached back to 1982, took that infectious chorus, and flipped Sending You Forget-Me-Nots into the massive hook, Here Come the Men in Black. Because Rushen has been incredibly diligent about her credits and publishing rights from a young age, this global number 1 hit ensured that her 1982 quote-unquote flop became the financial and creative foundation for one of the most successful film themes of the 1990s. From the jazz clubs of Los Angeles to the heights of Hollywood, Patrice Rushen ensured we would never forget her name. For track 6, this is the sound of a 24-year-old Londoner named Norman Washington Giscombe, better known to the world as Junior, stepping into a shoe repair shop in the early 1980s, and walking out with a transatlantic anthem. We've already touched upon a few elements of the Brit funk scene in the late 70s and early 80s London. This wasn't just a British imitation of American soul, it was a gritty, jazz-inflected, slap-bass heavy moment that felt like the streets of Wandsworth and Balham. And Junior's contribution was Mama Used to Say. Let's listen, press play now. Let's go back to Wandsworth. Born on the 6th of June 1957, Junior was the youngest of 8 children in a house that was a permanent collision of sound. His father was a devotee of Miles Davis and Wes Montgomery, filling the air with complex jazz structures, while his mother balanced the scales with the gospel of Mahalia Jackson and the songs of Jim Reeves and Ella Fitzgerald. But it was his sisters who provided the bridge to the future. One sister, living in America, would regularly send back James Brown singles like Money Won't Change You, which Junior later cited as the lightning bolt moment that made him want to be a performer. By the mid-70s, he was already an entrepreneur, attempting to build a label in Balham with former school classmates. During this ambitious period, he cut a track called Nice and Slow. Junior later claimed he only found out 20 years after the fact that the song had supposedly reached number 1 in Australia. He also recorded Get Up and Dance around 1978 or 79, which he stated reached number 1 in France and topped the Billboard Breakout chart in 1980. His true professional apprenticeship, however, happened as a backing vocalist for the Brit funk pioneers Lynx between 1980 and 82. He sang on early output, but Junior wasn't content in the background. He wanted to be front of the stage. In 1981, he was still working as a cobbler, a shoe repairman, to make ends meet. The legend of the song's lyrics start right there at the workbench. A young woman walked into the shop to have her shoes fixed. Junior was 22 at the time. She claimed she was 18. Junior, feeling a sudden strange anxiety about the 4-year age gap and the speed at which life was moving, lied and told her he was only 20 to make it more feasible for them to go out. That brief, awkward interaction triggered a memory of his mother's frequent warnings to him and his siblings about rushing to get old. He later noted that young people often kill 10 years of their lives rushing from 16 to 25. He sat down and wrote the lyrics in a burst of 5 to 10 minutes while still at work. He took the demo to Bob Carter, the talented arranger for Fixx, and together they hammered out the musical skeleton of the track. It was released on the 27th of July 1981, coincidentally Junior's sister's birthday, and then it stalled. It did almost nothing on the charts at first. Junior actually went back on tour as a backing singer for Fixx that winter because his solo career appeared to have misfired before it even started. But the track was a slow burner, eventually igniting in the clubs and crossing the Atlantic to the American dance floors. By the time the dust settled in June 1982, the song had finally climbed to number 7 on the UK singles chart, where it remained for 2 weeks. But the real earthquake happened in the United States. Junior became one of the very first black British artists to truly conquer the American R&B market on his own terms. The song peaked at number 30 on the Hot 100 and went all the way to number 2 on the Hot Soul Singles chart, an almost unheard of feat for a British newcomer at the time. The American music industry was floored by the Brit funk sound. Billboard magazine named him the best newcomer for 1982, and the award was presented to him by the godfather of soul himself, James Brown, the very man whose records Junior's sister had mailed to him from across the ocean years earlier. It was a full circle moment of the highest order. The song also proved its club credentials by hitting number 4 on the Billboard Dance Club Play chart. Junior even became only the second UK artist to appear on the legendary TV programme Soul Train. The track's DNA proved to be incredibly durable over the following decades. Its bright staccato guitar licks and synth bass line became foundational for hip-hop and the emerging New Jack Swing sound. It was famously sampled by Positive K in the 1992 hit I Got a Man, and later by Heavy D, Warren G, and even Junior's own nephew, the entertainer Richard Blackwood, who re-recorded it as Mama Who'da Man in 2000. Junior followed up this massive success with further hits, cementing his status as more than just a one-hit wonder of the era. But for now, we leave him in 1982, a former cobbler who turned a lie about his age and his mother's wisdom into a global soul standard. We end today by introducing another of my favourite 80s bands. It's 1982, you're in London, and the club scene, everything is new. You've got the New Romantics, you've got the New Wave, you've got EMI Records looking for the next Duran Duran. They find a band, they give them the producer who did Duran Duran's debut, Colin Thurston. They give them a support slot on the Duran Duran tour in late 1981. The band is called Talk Talk, and their first single, Mirror Man, released in February 1982, does almost nothing. But then they release a song that shares a name with the band itself. A song about people who talk and say absolutely nothing at all. It's a song with a pedigree that goes back to the muddy floor of the punk era. A song written by a man who studied child psychology and decided that silence was more interesting than noise. But we hadn't quite figured out how to use silence yet. This is the sound of 1982 trying to be polite while screaming internally. This is Talk Talk with Talk Talk, our final track today. We are here to talk about Talk Talk by Talk Talk from the album The Party's Over. But first, we must meet Mark Hollis. Mark was born in Tottenham in 1955, and before he was the patron saint of post-rock and silence, he was a guy who roadied for his brother Ed's band, Eddie and the Hot Rods. Ed was the musical mentor, the one who introduced Mark to jazz, specifically the space in Miles Davis and Gil Evans' collaborations. In 1977, Mark formed a band called The Reaction. They were a garage punk outfit, and they recorded a demo for Island Records. On that demo was a song called Talk 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 Talk. It was included on a Beggar's Banquet compilation called Streets. If you listen to this version, it is twice as fast. It's frantic, it's punk, but by 1981, The Reaction were over. Mark Hollis was looking for something else. He finds bassist Paul Webb and drummer Lee Harris. They had keyboardist Simon Brenner and became a quartet. They signed to EMI, the home of Duran Duran, and EMI sees a pattern. Double-barreled name, check. Synth-heavy sound, check. Producer Colin Thurston, check. They take that old punk song, Talk, 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 and they shave off the extra talks. They slow it down, they let Colin Thurston throw every 1982 production trick in the book at it, electronic drums, staccato piano, and a Fairlight CMI synthesizer. The lyrics are bleak. Mark Hollis is writing about communication breakdown and abusive behaviour. He later described the song as his view and judgment of humanity. While other bands were singing about dancing on the sand, Mark was singing about how all you do with me is talk talk. The single was first released on the 5th of April 1982. It didn't set the world on fire immediately, peaking only at number 52 in the UK. But Talk Talk were persistent. After their third single, Today, became a top 20 hit, peaking at number 14, EMI decided to try again. They re-released a re-recorded and reproduced version of Talk Talk on the 25th of October 1982. This time, it worked. The Talk Talk re-release climbed to number 23 in the UK. It crossed the Atlantic and reached number 75 on the Hot 100 on the 6th of November 1982. It even went to number 1 in South Africa in 1983. The debut album, The Party's Over, arrived in July 1982. It reached number 21 in the UK and was eventually certified silver. In the US, it reached number 132 on the Billboard 200. At this point, the world thought they knew what Talk Talk was, a smart, slightly moodier version of the New Romantic sound. But the party was only just beginning, And for Simon Brenner, it was already over. He would leave after the next single, My Foolish Friend, and Talk Talk became the trio who would score a number of classic hits across the rest of the decade. We shall meet them again soon. So that's the first half of Playlist 40 done and dusted. But do be sure to join us next week as we hit a very special milestone. For next week, we reach song number 500 on this musical odyssey. Can you believe it? 500 songs in. Incredible. We introduce Joan Jett and the Blackhearts to proceedings with an absolute stonker of a hit. We encounter the curious case of the Ra Band, specifically setting them up for a track a few years later. Tight Fit have one last trick up their sleeves. D-Train drops an absolute classic cover. Blondie see themselves out. And we end the episode with the Associates showing us some club country. As always, if you're enjoying the show and want to keep it going, please do visit my Buy Me a Coffee link. All contributions greatly appreciated. And if you can subscribe or leave a review, you'll be doing me a massive favour. But until next time, I hope you have a smashing week, and we'll see you again on I Completed 80s Music. Take care.